And it's our pleasure to have as a first speaker Thomas Garvey. Thomas is based in Ottawa, Canada, but Thomas has got a long journey also on the planet. You studied in Japan, so you are bringing to us, and we are thankful, this kind of global point of view already as a first speaker. You are a designer, you have a background in architecture, you have been working on spaces which are health-oriented. Some others are connected to urbanity and small places. So you have seen so many things at different scales that our first question, Sonia and myself, to you is, how do you respond to what is happening around you on a personal level and then zooming out? I need also to mention that you are on one side professor in a university, so you have this academic lens, but you are also board member of WDO, World Design Organization. And so you are seeing so many designerly stuff in complex systems. And we are curious to hear more about your views.
Well, thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you, Sonia. I look for this wonderful opportunity. I must say this is probably my best, my most looking forward to Zoom call I've had in a long time. We do this every day. We all work together around the world looking at the problems and the challenges and the opportunities we face. I really like the forum you've set up. I really like your forward-looking approach. I love the things you're saying about we're looking at re-emergence, we're looking at new things. Sonia, you said we've never been here before. This is very, very true, and we'll never be here again. This is a truly unique period for all of us. But again, the approach I like that you're taking is that we're looking forward. There are many, many challenges out there. There are many, many groups that are looking at the effect of the pandemic on all of us, on society, on design, and how we live. But very few have the same kind of forward-looking, positive feeling that you bring to this. So I'm very happy to be part of that. That's my first comment. And it's funny because we always talk about the future and how we imagine the future and what it will be. And of course, there are many people who say we cannot even imagine designing for a future we can't imagine, right? So whether it's new technologies or new ways of living, we often can't anticipate what the future will bring. But I can say for sure, we all know right now, I think, all of us coming together, I think we really have become to get a good sense of starting to understand what we really need, what we really don't need, and also what we're starting to become more inspired by and less inspired by. I think we're all being forced both by the fact that many of us around the world are stuck in our living environments. We're reduced with the number of people we can meet face to face every day. And our world has become quite small quite quickly. We have these wonderful technologies that allow us to reach out to each other, of course, digitally, but at the same time, our physical world has become isolated and small. So I think one of the great observations for all of us is that we're starting to really have a better sense of what's important to us. What's more important and what's less important. So that would be my first observation.
I would be curious, because of your architectural approach, how the notions of time and place are shrinking, because you already began to touch upon that. I would be curious to have your views.
Yeah, time. It's interesting you say that. Time, place is shrinking. I'm not sure time is shrinking in the same way. I think for many of us, we've lost very quickly a sense of time. I don't know some days whether it's Monday, whether it's Tuesday. I'm not sure sometimes if it's the morning or if it's the evening. The lack of a regular schedule, which we used to all have, both internally for ourselves, going to work every day, but also in the world around us, going to the shops and the stores, and when the buses are running, when the buses aren't running. For me, a sense of time has been completely lost.
So you mean that you are missing your rituals?
I'm missing rituals, or missing a sense of, yes, I think all of us are like that. It's interesting that the technology frees us up to be able to work anytime we want, with anybody we want, but that also puts a kind of a burden on us to sort of always be readily available 24/7 to everybody. And I found a lot of my colleagues, and of course, each of us have different temperaments and different personalities. I myself quite enjoy time alone. I enjoy time to think. I enjoy time to sketch and walk and plan and design. But I've also noticed a lot of my colleagues who are much more gregarious, much more sociable, much more inspired by human contact, have found themselves very isolated. And so suddenly, where we used to maybe talk once a week or once a month, we're now trying to talk every day or more frequently. So I think for some people, the sense of time has been lost, and it has a bit of a destabilizing effect, I think, on a lot of people.
So time-wise, you have got that uneasy feeling, and space-wise, you mentioned it's shrinking, and I know that you have been quite a heavy traveler. Are you missing traveling?
That's a very good point. Look, I think you must travel, I was traveling probably once a month to someplace around the world. I miss that terribly. I don't miss the airports. I don't miss the airplanes. But I miss being in different cities around the world and eating different food around the world and seeing different other designers and sharing ideas with people around the world. Definitely.
So what would be your most fascinating souvenir of a great drink you had somewhere on the planet, top of the mind?
Wow. That would have to be a lassi, I think, somewhere in India.
Oh, everything brings us back to India. Huh?
I think, well, it's funny, because I've had so much great opportunity in the last 2 or 3 years to visit different conferences, competitions, and groups of thinkers in India. And these experiences have been really, really quite wonderful for me. In fact, this is how we came to know each other through our visit. I think I met you, Alok, for the first time in India, and Sonia, we had a chance to visit your wonderful place and feel the creativity and the spirit and the energy of what you're doing. So yes, I'm definitely drawn to India.
So we have, Sonia.
And we actually changed locations from where we were going to do this to another place. Just right on the back of what's happening with COVID, we have climate change and we have all of these issues. You said something about it being forward thinking, our platform being something which was forward looking. You also said that there are things that you're missing, which is traveling and other things. So yes, there are things we miss. And yet when people talk about, consulting companies talk about how we need to get our return muscle back. We must come back. We must revisit. We must reopen. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried, Thomas, whether we will miss this amazing opportunity to rethink, reframe everything. We will miss those amazing moments that are happening around the world. America set up a food fund. People have rainbows in their windows. In UK, we have in India, in Mumbai, the flamingos are sort of getting together. In Delhi, the air is cleaner. We can see the Himalayas. Endangered species are roaming the streets. We are rediscovering time. We are rediscovering the meaning of work. There's something new that's emerging, and there's an opportunity to reframe a lot of our challenges as fresh opportunities to watch and listen and observe carefully what's going on and what are those shifts and what can we learn from them. Can we use this moment that we have together to just dwell on that a little bit, so we don't want to return to all of those things, right away without having given it, sufficient thought and a rethink and a reframe of where we were. I wanted to ask you that how can we influence a little bit of rethink, a little bit of reframe as we move forward, where we are just not coming back to the same normal. It's not even a new normal. It's something amazing and special, and it's a new consciousness. There's greater wisdom. And I know my country has given the world a lot of wisdom, and maybe it's influenced you in some ways. Maybe there's something there. Can you help us connect the dots between the places and the philosophies, the opportunities you see just now?
I think it's really a very key point, Sonia. First of all, we're not going back. There's no normal to go back to. I don't even like the phrase new normal, because that implies another version of what was normal. But we should say, first of all, though, I care deeply about all the people who have been really suffering in this situation. It could be a lack of employment. It could be less access to food. It could be increased violence at home. There's a lot of really unfortunate effects of this for a lot of people, and I care deeply about that. But at the same time, I do feel, as you do, it's time to rethink this. There's something exciting about tearing something up and trying to create something new. So there's an excitement in me in thinking, okay, well, I'm kind of glad to see a lot of these shops closing down. I'm kind of glad to see a lot of these other industries that maybe are old and tired not working anymore. If we can at the same time consider, how do we bring everybody along with us? So while recognizing that rejecting old ideas means somebody might be hurt in the near term, how do we take those people with us and move forward to a new model? So like you are, I'm quite excited about the idea of not returning to normal. I'm quite excited about the idea of seeing things disappear that weren't working that well. When it comes down to the very essence of life, the very essence of what we need to do every day, they don't work anymore. I'm glad to see them go, providing, as I said, we can kind of keep us all together. So, we're not going to go back to an office and say, okay, we'll go back to the old office model, the old living model, and just separate our desks farther apart. We're not going to go back to a shopping mall model where we take turns entering the store and coming out one after the other. That's the new normal, and we're not going back to that, I hope. The other interesting thing about this, in terms of bringing people along together, we often talk, and I've said before, how as designers and working with non-designers, we're dreamers. I mean, designers are dreamers in the sense that they're always looking forward to creating something new. But the challenge has often been that we can usually dream faster than we can create a new world. So we can imagine a new world more quickly than we can create it. And even though we can create a new world quickly,
Yes.
we can often create it more quickly than many of our people in our society can accept it. So that gap I've spoken about between dreaming and building and accepting. But a lot of that problem was because we were, as designers, we were more isolated as a community. We were the class that was working on the problem solving, and other people were going about their daily lives separate from that. What's really exciting today is the fact that we're now doing this all together. My brothers and sisters, my neighbors, my colleagues who are non-designers, they're going through the same challenges, they're imagining the same new ideas as we are. So something really unique about the fact that we're doing this together. I sort of think back to some of the, let's call them tragedies in my lifetime, and I think certainly in terms of North America, 9/11 in New York City was one of them. But what was different there was very soon after, I think they estimated about 9 months after, so right after the initial event, people came together very closely. But within 9 months to a year, they had sort of gone back to their life. And then other examples like, some of the world wars where it took years and years, 4 or 5 years of people working together, and then they went back to their lives. I have a feeling somehow that we're not going back to normal. We can't really imagine what that is. There's something very exciting about it. There's something very intimidating about it. But I think the fact that we're working together, I think many of us are recognizing the value of our friendships and our families. As coming back to your comment, look, we're really recognizing the preciousness of time. Even though it's been quite disturbed for some of us, it's up and down, and night is day and day is night, but we also do recognize how precious it is. So I have a very positive feeling that we are going to move forward to something new. What that is, well, that's why we have these series like you've created to initiate the discussion.
That's good. And in terms of envisioning some happy moments, how do you think we should proceed, or how do you proceed? Are you looking back at some elements of the past that inspire you, or are you getting into what is happening in some other geographies and that will help you to push the questioning? The way I'm asking, the context of the question would be entrepreneurship, innovation, design, creativity. All these words are interconnected, and you have been busy with all these areas. And so, in a nutshell, how are we looking at stuff in a happy way from your point of view?
That's interesting. Look, first of all, when you think about looking back, there's something nostalgic about that. And I think we will always look back to things that we liked, and we'll bring them forward to some degree for peace of mind, for nostalgic reasons. I'm going to jump quickly into the idea of young people's lives and then bring it back to the idea of entrepreneurship. Right now, most of our students around the world, certainly those who are close to graduation, are stuck with the unusual prospect of almost no work opportunities. So you have these tens of thousands of people all around the world, young people with all the energy, all the education they need, all the tools they need, ready to take on the world, and there's nothing for them to do. So in a sense, that also creates an opportunity. I was listening to a discussion recently about how in generations past, it was quite common between the time of finishing your education and starting your profession to take some time to explore. I'm coming to your point, I look about different geographies. And what one would do is they would leave their world and go to another world for a short period. It might be to explore another country, it might be to explore another part of their own country. And they would travel, and the idea of exploring something unknown to them would enrich them and open their mind, and then they would come back and start their life. And this was kind of a normal thing for us. In recent years, it's quite uncommon. So today the pressures are for young people to leave university and to have the job on Monday morning. And for years, I've been seeing the loss of an opportunity that is. The pressure to get into the work environment has been so tough, at least in this part of the world. And I've always thought that the young people are losing that opportunity to explore these other geographies, these other places, these other peoples, these other cultures. And now it's kind of interesting that they're being forced to think about that again, because suddenly they can't go into an employment. So that's one opportunity that opens up. But the second opportunity which opens up that you refer to, Alok, is the idea of entrepreneurship. Because whereas before entrepreneurs were a smaller number of people who chose a very individual path based on individual inspiration, and they chose it almost as a more rare thing to do. It was not the common thing to do. It was the less common thing to do, to be an entrepreneur. Whereas today, suddenly, all these people are forced to think about that now as a new option. So with more people being forced to say, okay, the normal path of development, the normal path of becoming a designer, of developing a career is not open to me. I wonder how many people will become entrepreneurs. I wonder how many people will start to explore more than in the past. And as a result, I wonder how much more innovative we will be. The other thing I think I mentioned earlier, which I found really interesting, is how fast this has all happened. I was listening to Bill Gates recently talk about the power of the internet, and he was saying that if this had happened 10 years ago, we would not have been able to accomplish any of the things we're doing now. The internet just did not have the bandwidth. We couldn't do all the things we're doing now. So actually, this particular time in history, the cultural, social crises we're having are matching up quite well with the technological. So I'm quite interested to see how that will play out too. That we have a kind of an accelerated opportunity where what might have taken normally years of transformation for designers and for design culture is happening within a matter of weeks and months. So I think that's part of the unique situation we live in. And I think there's a small sense, I believe, of moving away from the individual and towards community. There's lots of, it's funny how you mentioned earlier, Luke, some of my experiences. I've always valued myself as a bit of a global person. I love the idea that the technology allows me to talk to my friends in Japan or in India. And so for many years recently, I've been thinking more of the power that the world has brought us to expand ourselves. But during this period, I'm actually kind of reversed a little bit. And I'm more excited now by the fact that here in the city of Ottawa, we're now allowed to grow our own food. There's certain regulations against growing certain types of food in a household environment. And now they're changing all those rules so people can start to explore local gardens, local communities. So now I'm finding that the global has reversed somewhat, and there's kind of a renewed excitement about the local and the local community in particular. Yeah.
So would that be? I'll go and take a question. I saw one of the attendees asking if this situation is forcing businesses to move towards conscious capitalism and conscious consumption. What would be your reaction to that notion of conscious and conscious capitalism? Do we have conscious entrepreneur being conscious about the others, or do we see more of that coming?
Yeah, I'm curious about the combination of the words forced and conscious. There's a slight contradiction there. I don't know if they're being forced, but they're probably being smart to move in that direction. You know, when we talked earlier about not returning to normal, realizing more and more what we need and want, and realizing every day it's less and less. The challenge for the designer then becomes, and the challenge for these companies that you speak about becomes, how can we create fewer things with greater value, and how can we value greater fewer things? So there's always going to be that tension between, I think all of us would be willing to have less if they brought more value to our lives. So again, it also goes back to the point of that which is least effective and that which is least efficient in the world will pass away during these times. They will drop off. The businesses that are less effective will just close. The ways of thinking that are less contributing will fade away, I think.
I want to add to what you're saying to answer to this question. The next generation, people like my daughter, who's 12 years old, she's already saying that the new modernity is not going to be like your old modernity. Because so she's calling it modernity, and that's what she's calling, what other people are calling the new normal, because she's saying that we've seen the things that don't work. So to be able to design a more conscious economy and systems, we will need a shift in mindset in the leaders. Or otherwise, we will need new leaders. It may take time, which is where the entire reimagination piece is going to take time, but it has to happen. There is no choice anymore. We are reaching a situation, like you said, we are all connected in this problem together, and yet we are all also connected back to our own earth and our own space. What a rare moment it is. At one level, I can speak with you, and at another level, you are so much at home, and I'm so much in my own land, planting seeds, thinking about growing a food forest in my own farm. And when I start thinking like this, I can no longer be fooled into buying more and more things, because I'm seeing the fallacy of that system. And that's my fear. I don't think the next generation wants us to return. But my fear is our own rigid mindset will want to snap back into the way we used to think and assume it's all gone back to the same thing. To be able to create the next, we need the next generation pushing for it. And maybe that's where that gap that you're talking about, where it may not be entrepreneurship, it may be projects. That space the students have now. Maybe God has given them this time where they don't have a job. When the parents can't push them into a job and say, hey, now you finished, now you need to pay that loan back, get into a job. There is no job. But maybe there is this opportunity to be the change makers. And, maybe they will take the baton over altogether. But this conscious economy is going to happen maybe from the inside out, because we're getting this moment to go inside and not just be driven by outside forces. So therefore, we need to make things like the internet and all of these tools of creation and not be consumed by it. The minute we are not consumed by it, maybe we are able to I'm just responding about it. Just what you said made me think of all of this, that this space that the next generation is getting, the questions it is asking, it needs to ask them harder. It needs to make its voice felt much more and not let us snap back into the same chalta hai, something or the other is happening, and we know it's going to impact the planet, but production needs to work, etc. That kind of mindset that we have.
It's interesting you mentioned your daughter, Sonia, because it's kind of the responsibility of the young people in every generation to challenge the status quo. I mean, that has always been, right? Young people have always challenged the status quo and imagined new worlds. But what's the difference today? A couple of things. I think one, I think in my experience here, they're working more together in their determination of what has to be. You're quite right. They're gonna say we want something new. We're not going back to the way. And if we don't lead the way, they will lead the way. And that's actually good, because that's the way the world should work. But one big difference is I think they're working better together in deciding together where we need to go forward. But coming back to the point I made earlier, the other challenge I mentioned about, so we have these young people, the job is not there, so they have these huge opportunities to do things. And you think of all the help we're going to need. Let's say we get back to a point where we have a vaccine, and suddenly we have to vaccinate half the population of the Earth, or the planet rather. And you think of all the volunteering and all the exciting things that students could be doing, young people could be doing, because they can't get a job. The organizations they could join, but then they have the problems with travel. So I'm thinking all the idea of, okay, they have this free time, and wouldn't it be great if they could, as I say, travel from a different part of their country to another part of their country to a different part of the world. But suddenly they have the time, but not the opportunity to move. So I'm not sure, you might know more, Sonia, from looking at your daughter's experiences, how much she's using the digital tools to work with her colleagues, work with her friends. But I think that they will always fill that role. I also thinking a little bit younger. It's interesting to me when I look at children in the street recently. I spend a lot of time thinking what's going through their mind. For a child, for us a year is a year, but for a child a year is a lifetime. And so imagine the things that are happening in their minds as they grow up into the world. They look out and they see everybody walking around in masks, for example. They're afraid to They're afraid to get close to somebody in the park because it could be dangerous. I know I'm jumping a bit further down the age ladder to younger people, but I do think that's also something we should be thinking about. What kind of a world do these young people see when they look out the door today, when they walk down the street today? And what are we doing to contribute to that?
So Thomas, having been in Japan for some years, did you get any feedback from some of the people you know there about what is happening there? Because it's interesting to see with your experience how it resonates.
Yeah, a couple of interesting points. I was there last February. I was most recently I was there from the end of February to the beginning of March.
So just before the lockdown.
Just before the lockdown. So we were aware of what was going on. It's interesting though, when you think of Japan, you might know historically and or going back, even during normal cold seasons, the Japanese quite frequently wear masks. It's not uncommon in the winter in Japan to get on a train and have most of the people or half the people wearing a mask. Whereas here we would never have done that before. So a lot of the things that the visual world we see here, which is so different than the visual world normally, that's not so different there. The other difference is that they went longer before a shutdown. The shutdown was not nearly as complete as ours. So I have colleagues working in major corporations. So what they started doing is, for example, some of them were starting to work every second day of the week. Then they went to a model where they were working at home 4 days a week and they would all go to the office 1 day a week. And now they're back to 4 days a week and 1 day off. So they never went to a full shutdown, so to speak.
So you're touching upon a point which is fascinating to me, which is confidence. All the policymakers and politicians and the business are expecting people to be confident about what is going to happen so that they can go back to restaurant, they can go back to traveling and whatever, tourism. How do we see this notion of confidence? Because that is something which is so complex. As designers and as policymakers, the lens we have on confidence is different. And I would be curious to have your thoughts on that keyword.
That's an interesting idea. So confidence, well, there's two things which I think I'll only speak to my very limited knowledge of Japan for the moment. But there are two aspects there. One is the confidence and the kind of, let's get down and get to work, positive attitude. But there's also a sense that how much is the public being made fully aware of the full problem? We know around the world that statistics are kept in different ways. Some countries are more open than others. In fact, some of the countries that did best were the ones where the information was most available. So by having more information available, they could react sooner. Other countries either restricted information or came across with the attitude that from the government that, this is not that serious. So there's a balance between the confidence of the people and the information that they're given. But from that point of view, the confidence, it's funny you said that, because coming back to the idea, Sonia, when you said before about we're not going back to the normal, we have to move forward. I think some of us gain a certain confidence in the time of crisis. As designers, there's something very stimulating about a challenge. I sort of feel when these things happen, I feel like, okay, wow, I've been waiting for this day to come. I've been waiting so I can jump in. Maybe I can do something now. So I'm not sure when you say confidence, look, if you mean that kind of confidence, the confidence of the designer, the confidence of the innovator, the confidence of the thinker who likes to take on challenges, who likes to face adversity. But I certainly feel there's an element of excitement there, which comes from the confidence of knowing we can create something new. We can create.
To build on that question, there's a question here, which is why is pharma-based vaccination a solution? And it comes from confidence. It's just people need a vaccine, so you're asking for that. And it sort of builds on that same idea. And it says, the question goes on, why can't we look at a natural way to build immunity to fight viruses? I think this is the type of change in thinking we need today. What are your views to it?
That's a great question. I'm not going to speak to the pharmacology or any of the scientific, because I wouldn't have the experience. But what I like about that question is I like the idea that we don't have to think about the obvious solutions, number one. And number two, any one solution by itself is not sufficient, it would seem. So people talk about wearing masks. People talk about washing your hands. People talk about social distancing. And they'll tend to find the problems with each. Well, the masks don't work completely because of this reason. So in fact, none of these solutions work by themselves, but as a combination, if we continue to wear masks and wash our hands and keep our distance and take care of ourselves, as a sum total, we're probably going to be a lot better off. So in that sense, I would agree with the questioner who, in the sense that the more of a natural approach we can take, the better we can take care of our health generally. Obviously, the better.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer, Thomas, because I would have the same question. I'm a great believer in the turmeric lattes and the Indian food healing systems, etc. But what you're saying, and maybe we're in a strange moment where we need to respond, react, reframe, and reimagine all at the same moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, so as change makers, decision makers, I think we need to do all three things together. And which is where maybe leaders are getting a little bit flabbergasted, and that's where there is no confidence in that decision making. How do I do all of this together? So you need to balance it out, because you can't do either or.
Which is very much a designerly way of looking at stuff. How do we do stuff together in parallel and testing? That would be my quick reaction. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and also feeling comfortable with ambiguity. I mean, designers are very comfortable in the fuzzy areas. We're comfortable with trying to put pieces together. And again, I think it's the sum total of the way we put the pieces together which makes sense, and not the individual pieces, right?
So we have, during this happy hour where we try to be happy about the future, we have a question which is looking in a more pessimistic way. And it's Stephanie Steiger. So Stephanie is worried about companies who are realizing how effective it was in their everyday business to have what happened. What do you think about that? Mistake frantic working fueled by fear of corona and losing job with effective self-motivated work. They might now demand the same level of output with a lower level of input. So leading, if I may reframe, to people who are gonna burn out.
That's a great question, Stephanie. Let's talk a little bit about some of those changes that are happening, and then how we can face them. You probably all saw the notice that Twitter has decided that because things are working so well, they're going to leave their staff remote permanently. They're not going to bring them back. Right now, 40%, I heard recently, 40% of the real estate in southern Manhattan in the financial district is empty. So companies are realizing, guess what? This is working for a lot of people. It's not working for everybody. It's not working all the time. But certainly, let's say 40% of the time it is working. So guess what? Now 40% we need less real estate. We need less expenses. We have these people working at home. The same with universities. I can imagine it would be quite normal for a student to sit at home and think, okay, well, I'm sitting at home, I'm paying my tuition. I'm not accessing the library. I can't access the buildings, the laboratories, the gymnasium, but I'm working from home. So the interesting thing is that these efficiencies, I think, are good, but then we have to almost reevaluate our contract with society. And if I'm not going to be working at the office, then maybe my salary should be compensated for. If I'm working at home, maybe I need to reevaluate what my worth is. I think one of the areas which is most difficult in that sense is our time. How we make sure that we're only working so many hours a day, and we're leaving time to be with ourselves, with our family, with our health, with our food, with our exercise. So I think that's a really good question. As things start to, as companies realize they can maybe get more out of people, then we together have to renegotiate our social contract. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think it could be abused if we don't stand up for ourselves. I often talk about the same thing with young students who are becoming interns in a company. They're young designers, and they join a company, and they're not paid very much, but they're so excited to have a chance to work on something real. And sometimes the companies don't even pay them, and we don't permit that. So we'll sit down with our students. We'll say, okay, yes, of course, this is a new opportunity. And yes, of course, it's very exciting you get to work in a real company. But what value do you think you're actually bringing? What value is the company getting from your labor, from your design talents, for example? And how do you negotiate that in a very fair and professional way? So it's a good question that Stephanie has. What happens to the potential of abuse of the new potentials? But I think simply we're going to have to renegotiate in an open way what value we bring and when and how we bring it. You're working at home, the cost of your technology, your computer, your furnishings, your lighting, your your electricity. These are all things which you're now spending on your own to do company work, right?
Yeah. Now, social contract redesign would be what you are suggesting, which I think is so fundamental. Because if we look back at all the social contracts, they are 19th century or 20th century based. And what is happening now is, as you said, pushing us to rethink the contracts between individuals and multiple. That would be, I guess, one of the most fascinating insight that this conversation is helping us to rethink. How can we help policymakers to redesign that social contract? Because here in Belgium, in France, they are lost, the policymakers. So many conversations going on this tension. I'm sure it's happening in North America, in India, and in many places. And that is where it will be good to have some more elaboration in the coming weeks and months. How can we help all of us together rethink about social contracts? What do you think about that? Would that be high on your agenda if you're called for?
That's a very interesting topic. It's a great new, yes. You'll have to make it the topic of one of your design open happy hour talks.
Yeah.
Fit it in. That's really great.
So Sonia, one idea which is coming out of this conversation is that the way we designed happy hour is having a guest and sharing insights. Maybe in few weeks we'll have a design open happy workshop with you, Thomas, Sonia, and some other attendees, and push our thinking in exploring areas which are emerging because we had these kind of conversations. That would be for me one of the happy surprise, just triggering.
I think, for instance, it's a great idea. And what you're saying about social contracts and how it changes across geographies. It's very different in our geography. We've had a system where there are these migrant labor, and all of us are migrants within the country. We've moved from one part of the country to another. And a lot of us are free to do a lot of the things because we have all these people who come and work. And all these people are feeling rejected. They're going back. They're not being looked after. Their needs are not thought about. And so it's this. So they're rethinking. They will rethink their return. They will rethink how they engage with us. And there's going to be this tension which, if not resolved, can really affect the social fabric very badly. So this social contract is an amazing topic, which I think a lot of the tension is exactly there. On how much freedom do you give people? How much autonomy do you give them? How much control you have over them in this moment? How much do you look after them and how much do you expect them to look after yourself? And all the leaders are completely engaged in those negotiations. So yes, it's an important topic, and maybe we should bring in some, political, social leaders who are engaged in this, and they can talk about the challenges that they have.
So Soumya is bringing a pragmatic question, and I connect that to social contract, which is leading to urbanity and all these buildings which are or were supposed to be working places. And Soumya is asking, how can we envision the future of those build spaces? And Thomas, you have that long experience of architect and architecture in different geographies. What would be? You mentioned Manhattan and half of Manhattan being unused, so-called. What would be the futures of those spaces?
Funny, I was just thinking the exact same thing when I was listening to Sonia, because we don't have the same issues here with migrants. But you made me think of the transfer from the rural environments to urban environments for work. And as you say, look, as soon as we find out all those towers we built in all of our cities, downtown cores, for the purpose of work, are not required. And I'm so struck by the fact that, now again, people are drawn to urban environments not only for work, but also for society and for social life and for access to many things, of course. But certainly a great part of it is the drive to need to be close to work, and what a fundamental shift that would allow us to do, not so much to change the current environments, but in building new environments moving forward. How many people won't have to move to cities anymore? And if you bring up the idea of food production and the value of local food, that's another layer you can put on top of people wanting to stay locally. So you're quite right, Alok, when you think about architecture around the world, you think of some of the places, let's say in Europe, where you have large populations with small densities, which I consider a very successful way to live, as opposed to large urban centers that are very small, like Manhattan or some of the bigger cities that are very small in area but large in density. So we have the opportunity to squeeze out the density, to reduce the density. That's where the problems usually come from. Population itself is not. People think of population as being a problem. Large populations generally are not problems. Problems tend to come from density-related issues, not population-related issues. So you're quite right. Of course, that means reinventing our transportation systems and everything else too. But yeah, I can imagine all these downtown cores with these tall buildings, which won't be required. I was saying, by the way, it was 40% of Lower Manhattan, 40% of the Wall Street area. I don't know the numbers for Manhattan itself, but this was talking about the financial district was about 40% empty at the moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting you are focusing on the word density, because what happened if we look back these last 30 years is that some areas which were designed for certain quantity are no more in the capacity to take care of activities because density came in. Traffic jam is the most obvious example. But if we scale up, we have some other areas where density came in. So the question for me is, are we capable to deal with density through our education, through our studies, through our activities, because it's such a complex dimension. Look at the COVID and the density and the exponential phenomena. 10 weeks allowed to do stuff which would have taken 10 years. That's connected to density, but it requires a mindset. And I would be curious, Sonia, to have your point of view, Thomas, to have yours, and then we can go back to the attendees. We have 6 minutes left so that we make sure we jump on that. And there is a question by Howard Mijares that I would like us to look into, which is maybe connected. And I'll just pop in with the question. Howard is asking what will be the skills of the future. And for me, mastering notions of density, is that a needed skill of the future or not? It's a question to all of us and to Howard.
No, I just wanted to talk about a live example, and it would maybe add to an answer for Soumya as well. The example is that of the design barn, where we actually designed it a little bit out of town, and it's designed a big space so that it would be open, no air conditioning. You can come in with a wheelchair, so completely accessible, very low density. It's an open space, so it's adaptable. And it's actually showing itself to be even more relevant now, when people are going to need to sometimes huddle in small numbers to be able to get things done. So to be able to, while our reach through the online space will be huge now, because we're finally learning to go digital, at another level, we need to meet in smaller groups to get things done. Because sometimes for certain kinds of work, you cannot get it done unless you meet. So we need spaces that are able to allow that. So that's in response to the density issue. So spaces that allow that are multifunctional, quite flexible, open, so that they're biophilic and integrate nature, so that these are healing environments and not environments where disease can spread. Some of these things, I think, in the new spaces, they need to be taken care of so that we don't reach a time when they become redundant.
Interesting. Thomas, reaction to that, and then we'll...
Yeah, that's... Well, I would state, before going too much further, let's look at what density is. People often confuse density with crowding. and they're not the same at all. Density is a prerequisite for crowding, but density does not equal crowding. So crowding is a personal appraisal that a person or a society makes. And we're all very different. So some people thrive, they absolutely thrive in very dense urban environments where people are close together and people live close together. Others find that very suffocating. And there's also the idea of coping assets. So when you are in a dense environment, what kind of assets do you have to cope? Can you escape if you need to? Can you find some quiet time if you need to? We all have different personalities. Who are you with? The social situation. Are you with somebody that you trust and care for? Or are you with somebody who's a stranger? So density is a very interesting concept. The truth is a lot of people move towards density, and a lot of humans thrive rather better in density. But I really liked your comment, Sonia, about biophilia, because that's another whole layer to put on that. When you talk about life, you talk about all the sort of natural life that we also need to live with, whether it's plant life or food life or animal life, and our own health. So that's usually not into the formula so often. So I think that the density in itself is not a bad thing. So we shouldn't look at density straight on as a problem. We'd rather look at the aspects of density and see where the problems can exist. So in the case, yes, as you mentioned, look, density in terms of people breathing the same air in a small environment is not going to be very good in our current situation. That's a different topic. But back to the question about the skills for the future, or skills for today was the question, I think.
Yeah. So we have that question, and we have number of other questions which too bad we won't be able to tackle, but we'll keep them in archive and we'll try to work on them in the coming days and weeks, and we'll think of a platform where we can elaborate on that. But Thomas,
again, I think it's simply a little more exaggerated. So the normal situation has become more exaggerated, but certainly the skills in my mind moving forward have got to be an open-mindedness, an ability to collaborate. All the other skills, as designers, we learn the mechanical skills of drawing and modeling and all those, thinking. Those are wonderful skills. We need them, and they're just the foundation. They don't take us any place. Mm-hmm. So you need them. So that's just automatically assumed that you get those first. But then the ability to be open-minded, the ability to collaborate. I think probably the one most important for me today in this situation would be the idea of identity capital, where there's something unique about you somehow. So when I look at CVs, and we review student portfolios and CVs, and there's always that one line that jumps off the CV. I spent the summer working in a certain place, let's say, for example, right? Or I did this job which was rather unique or different than anticipated. There's always some little thing that somebody did which was unique, and it gives them identity capital in the sense that you can, whether you have done it yourself or not, it says this person has tried something different. And this person, and particularly if they've succeeded, they've tried something different and they've succeeded, and now they're back here to, so I'd say today, probably for me, yeah.
I love that idea. It's amazing. I think it's always been around and we try to put something unique, but when you frame it like that, identity capital, I think, is a big takeaway from our conversation. And that again, with students having the time and being able to shape this early on than to try to find the time and the space to do it later on. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great time for them to start thinking about this. So I see a lot of conversation again amongst the younger lot about not so much what's your hobby, but what's your talent, So that again is in the same space of how are you different? What is your expression? How are you unique when there are all of us connected and all of us beaming out there? So I think it's a beautiful idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas and Sonia. We have a fascinating question in the chat zone by Kalim, and it will take us an hour to go through that. It's a great question, so I think we need to. Kalim will come back on that one in the coming weeks. It's something so interesting. And we don't want to kill it in a 30 seconds answer. And Stephanie came back with another comment about renegotiation togetherness and the notion of trust and who's gonna drive the plane. That is also a super interesting question. So attendees, we keep in mind all this, and we are so happy to have Thomas allowing us to trigger this conversation, because we see that it's going in so many different directions. And
Right.
Sonia, Thomas, too bad, and that's the frustration of this kind of session. We'll have to close in few seconds. So two things. One is, first, thank you to Thomas, and thanks to all the technical team and the project management team of Spread who allowed us to organize this session. And Sonia, you want to announce the next speaker so that we make sure that things are building up?
Very excited to have Deepa Prahlad as our next speaker. She's a prolific author. She's and she's a very dear friend of mine, and she's writes on various topics. And this is on the 12th of June. Look out for the details, and you'll find the details coming up shortly, right away, in fact. So register early on and help us spread the word. And Thomas, we want you back. And to continue this conversation, the idea here is to make a community and a collective and a burning platform where we are all in it together, and we can have these conversations more frequently.
Well, thank you, Sonia and Alok. This is a wonderful initiative. I'm so glad to be participating. And I'm so glad to see so many people with questions. That's one of the best parts of this, is to have that excitement. So I hope I'll be back for the next one. I'll be having maybe some questions as well. But thanks to all the people who put questions to us. That's a really important part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Sonia, and thanks everyone for being there. We know that time is so precious for each of us, so we'll be leaving in few seconds. But do come back, and you have seen how Thomas has.
Don't forget your mask when you go out.
Thank you.
Thank
you, everyone, and have a good day, good afternoon, or good evening in your geography.